Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's discussion sponsored by the Pepperell Democratic Town Committee. Please pardon me for not standing up. My name is Tom McGrath, and I'm the chair of the Pepperell Democratic Town Committee. And this is a great, great honor for me. I was talking to some of our members before this event. I grew up here in Pepperell. I'm a graduate of North Middlesex Regional High School in Townsend, which covers Pepperell. I graduated in the class of 1970, so you know I'm 65 years old. I grew up as a gay person here in Pepperell and graduate from North Middlesex High School, and I can tell you it was not an easy time growing up here in Pepperell and graduating from high school. I came from a wonderful, wonderful family with wonderful parents. That was easy. But this atmosphere was not easy for a person growing up in the 1960s. But I've been back in Pepperell for a long time. Besides serving on the town committee, I've served on the zoning board of appeals and a number of other capacities here in town. And I can live an openly gay life, and I'm very fortunate for that. And we've had a wonderful growth on our town committee in the past year. We've doubled in size and many new members with great new ideas. And this is one of the new ideas that we're having. I'm also very active. I have been for 18 years in Massachusetts Stonewall Democrats, which is the Lgbt organization that's a part of the National Democratic Party. And this is quite a feat for an area like this. So I've impressed my colleagues with Massachusetts Stonewall. So I want to make sure everyone feels welcome. The people that are new to Pepperell, just here visiting. If you're in town and you don't know anything about our town committee, please speak to me or any of our members. We do have a website, and if you'd like to join with us, you're more than welcome. Our meeting schedule is there, and contact, please. I'm listed as the chair. I'll talk to you at any time, and we'd love to have your participation. So at this point, I'm going to go sit down. I am going to introduce Alexandra Chandler, and she's going to introduce our speaker. So,
need him?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Good.
Thank you. Okay, Alexandra? Yeah.
So I'm Alexandra Chandler, and I happen to be a candidate for Congress for the 3rd Congressional District, fellow Democrat. But I'm here primarily to introduce Phil and to move on to the presentation that we're all here for, because in addition to being a candidate for Congress, I am also myself a transgender woman. And I have to say that as someone who, in year 2006, transitioned gender on the job as an intelligence analyst, working North Korea WMD proliferation, so trying to stop North Korea from exporting WMD and related materials, arms smuggling. The fact that I would then move back home, my parents live in Haverhill, my brother's in Attleboro, my wife's family is around Medford. The fact that 11 years later, the fact that my rights and the rights of trans people would be on the ballot is just crazy. It's just crazy that in 2006, the likes of Secretary Rumsfeld, and while we had an Attorney General named John Ashcroft, that this would be okay then, that my access to the right bathroom would be okay then. And yet here we are. So I'm here to give this event my own support, to be a resource however I can. And I'll say that in my run for Congress, I'm running to win and to have a progressive agenda and make working middle class people's lives better. But it's also very much a priority for me to highlight, to shine a light, to just indicate to as broad an audience as possible what we are facing, the extremism we are facing, and we cannot afford to be complicit. You will hear much more and in a great deal of data and details, we were talking very briefly about it earlier, about we cannot take this for granted. And that if this ballot measure succeeds here in Massachusetts, we will open the door to such measures all over this country. And so many people not just LGBT people, even trans people, forget about the general public, have no idea this is going on. Or if they know it's going on, they're confused about it and think that, oh, we're going to give transgender people anti-discrimination protections. That's great. Yeah. So thank you so much for being here, because this is such important work. It's not just for you to understand what's happening here, but to tell 10 of your best friends and 100 of your acquaintances, and to get mobilized for this in November, because this is serious. So with that, I will yield to the much, much, much more important speaker tonight, Phil, who will tell you all about this. So give him a warm round of applause.
Thank you. Appreciate the invitation. Yeah, my name is Phil Sherwood. I'm the campaign manager for Freedom for All Massachusetts. Freedom for All Massachusetts is the entity that was set up to protect this important law. I've been on board for about 3 months, and I'm going to go a little bit about the history of these laws in the state of Massachusetts, talk a little bit about the national landscape and how Massachusetts fits into it, but also get a little deeper into the weeds and talk a little bit about why we're actually at risk here in Massachusetts of losing this. It's easy to make the assumption that because it's Massachusetts and we lead on so many other issues that somehow we're not vulnerable here. We absolutely are. And we'll get right down to the nitty-gritty and show you some polling as well. And we'll show you some of the opposition's ads, so you get a sense of what the other side's message is. I will say that please feel welcome to ask questions at any point. If it's a question that's not related to the slide that's right in front of us, feel free to wait to the end. No question is inappropriate or too stupid. We have a duty to do 2 things. It's to educate the public, but also to win this election come November. And so under the umbrella of educating the public, we understand that people are coming from a different level of understanding. So please feel free, you're among friends. I'm happy to be here in front of the town committee tonight. In my own hometown, I'm the town chair, and I appreciate the work that you all do in the grassroots in the community, and love this approach of taking issues like this that are inherently bipartisan, but elevating them so that more people know about it. Definitely respect that. Going along, and I'll do my best. You can hear me okay over there? Beautiful. So who founded Freedom for All Massachusetts and who governs it? These are some organizations that have national sort of stature, but also some state stature. These are folks that for many decades have been working on LGBTQ issues, and they're governing the organization. They make up the executive committee that will hire me, but also provide guidance to the staff, of which there's about 14 staff members right now. And I'll get into a little bit as to the structure of the campaign. We're a little bigger than most campaigns of this nature would be this early on, but there's a reason for that, and we'll dig into that. This next slide shows where there's currently non-discrimination laws for the transgender community. The red states, don't think of this as parties, right? Like red being Republican, blue. It's not what this means. I know when we put our partisan hats on, we see red and we're like, woo! That's not what this means. The red are states that have protections in some way, shape, or form, generally comprehensive. The states in blue are states that have some level of protection, but not comprehensive. The gray states are the ones that have UGATs, 0, nothing, as it pertains to gender identity. That means discrimination for housing, employment, lending, and public accommodations. The Wild West, really. This next slide are states that have recently introduced anti-LGBT legislation. Doesn't mean it's passed. It's in some form, iteration. Maybe it passed, or maybe it's just being debated. As you can tell, progress has been made on these issues nationally over the last decade. Significant knowledge. There's still folks working really hard to make sure that certain individuals are singled out and don't have equal rights. And these are all the states that have introduced the bills. Quite a few. Recently, we've heard about the economic impacts. Harvard Business Review has done some studies showing that states that have protections are more productive, We know in North Carolina, when House Bill 2 was being debated, there was a big blowback. The state lost, this is conservative estimate, close to $630 million. These are businesses and entities that said, you know what, if the state is going to take this stance and not stand up for individuals, we don't want to do business there. This is going to be a common theme with my presentation. Businesses are at the forefront of standing up for these civil rights. That's sort of historically not necessarily the case in the United States, but it's really refreshing to see, folks like Bank of America, quite frankly, come out and support this financially, but also in spirit, because they believe in civil rights. And it makes it a lot easier for legislative bodies, too, to do the right thing as well. And of course, there's an effect of tourism. I would say that Massachusetts, should this repeal occur in Massachusetts, the economic ramifications would be much larger in Massachusetts. I don't have studies to back that up, but when you just look at the economies of scale, North Carolina versus Massachusetts, my sense is that Boston probably has an economy that is on par with North Carolina. So we're talking statewide, could be lots of revenue lost. So let me turn back the clock a little bit in Massachusetts and where some of these statewide protections came from. In 2011, many of the organizations you saw earlier that are governing this, my organization, fought to have a comprehensive transgender equal protection law enacted that addressed public amenities, and I'll get into a little bit later what exactly that is, but banking, housing, extend the normal equal protections that folks would have onto the transgender community and those with gender with gender identity. Weren't able to get everything in 2011. They took out public amenities. But the advocacy community said, fine, take it out. We want important things here in Massachusetts in terms of banking and housing, but with the promise that we're coming back next year and we're going to make this right and we're going to make it more holistic and we're going to make sure that we have equal rights protections as it pertains to public amenities. So this was 2011. So what do I mean when I say public accommodations? Well, here we are. It's about restaurants, hotels, medical offices, public parks, public transportation, theaters, anywhere the members of public would normally be welcome. Until 2016, the transgender community did not have equal rights protections. Legitimately, you could walk into a Dunkin' Donuts and legally get tossed out. You could walk into a restaurant and refuse to be served. Sort of mind-boggling when you think about it. So there was an effort afoot for a couple of years to expand this equal protection law to include public amenities. The media weighed in on it, companies weighed in on it, and ultimately it was a very broad coalition, interfaith, corporate, advocacy community. The media, by and large, understood this as an important issue to advocate for and weighed in on it. And there was bipartisan support in the legislature as well. People didn't dig their partisan heels in like so often happens on these issues. And just a quick flashpoint of some of the companies in 2016 that were vocal on this. Many of them. They've helped fund this effort, but obviously working with their employees. And we heard from many of these businesses that the reason they took action is because internally their employees said it was important. In fact, the other day was in front of employees at Google, and they're having the same situation. It's really cool to be inside Google talking to all these geeks, but in the end they were passionate about making sure that employees that work for them and their coworkers that were vulnerable, that they were represented and protected, and they're standing up and taking action. So in the end, it passed the House, pretty strong margin. There was a significant Democratic majority in the House, but it passed with bipartisan support. It passed the Senate on a voice vote, and it was signed by Governor Baker. And big deal, not that long ago that this happened, but again, what this did is included public amenities into the equal protection statute here in the state. Right off the bat, the ink was not dry, and the opposition organized what they call the Free Speech Brigade, or something to that effect. And their goal was to get a referendum on the ballot that would repeal this state law. Now, we know that ballot initiatives in Massachusetts were no stranger to that. This is a little bit different. This one seeks to repeal an existing state statute. Think about it. It is odd to think that a civil right could be on the ballot to be taken away. This is the position that Massachusetts is in. It'll be the first time Massachusetts has voted on a ballot to remove a civil right. The nation's eyes very much are on Massachusetts. Why is the opposition doing this? Why in Massachusetts? Well, it's pretty darn easy actually in Massachusetts to get on the ballot to get a repeal. I think they got about 28,000 signatures, give or take. They qualified real quick. Real quick. So this is on the ballot. We know that there are other ballot initiatives in the state, that there's still some question as to if the legislature takes action, it may not be up for a vote, or courts might strike it down. We know we're on the ballot. We know this. There's only, in Massachusetts history, been 20 examples where there was a ballot initiative to remove an existing state statute. Only 20. The last one was 1989. I think it had to do with energy deregulation. The examples are quite often in an economic downturn, if the legislature had just voted to give themselves a raise. These are the type of things that sort of get on the ballot historically. And this is going back all the way to 1919, where this has been a tool. And you can just sort of see their angle, right? Very simplistic, but they got their signatures. So this is the ballot language. Feel free to take a look at it for a second. We're 90% sure that this is going to be the language. It ultimately gets finalized in June. We are the yes vote. When I say we are the yes vote, to uphold this law, it's a yes vote. So the no vote would be to repeal. Yes. Right. So in many states, folks play games with language and the description and so forth. Massachusetts is a lot cleaner in terms of guiding the voters in the right direction so that they know the intent of what they're voting for. I will say we're a little bit worried about ballot confusion. We know that people's genuinely their instincts are to do the right thing. But when they're unsure, when it comes to ballot questions, a lot of people's default position is to vote no. Historically, this is not helpful at all for us strategically, but 50% of the time the yes vote prevails. The other 50 is obviously the no vote. So we can't really look to history for any guidance about which way this will go. But certainly this is one of the many reasons why we're gearing up a little earlier to make sure that the public, A, knows this is on the ballot, and this is how you vote correctly if this is what you want to do. An interesting fact about Massachusetts, in my experience with ballot initiatives, when there's candidates on the ballot as well, there's huge drop-off. People vote for the candidates, say no, and then they walk away from some of the ballot questions. Not in Massachusetts. By golly, folks are engaged here. Anywhere between 96 to 98.5%. It's never been lower than 96%, the bottom ballot question. So in other words, people are going to be voting on this, whether they understand it or not. Can't say that's good, can't say that's bad, but history says that's the case. People are going to pick a bubble, they're going to fill it out. The opposition will attempt to color this language in a way that is unfavorable to those who believe in equal rights. But fortunately, we have the ability to push back a little bit, but it's in the Attorney General's hands for the most part. So where are we now with support? The coalition has grown to about 750 entities. 15 separate towns have signed on endorsing the campaign, 250 plus businesses, 400 faith leaders, women's organizations, and domestic violence prevention groups, and labor unions, and all of New England's professional sports teams. And I'll just let you know, and forgive me if the opposition hears this, but what I'm really looking for is Tom Brady and Giselle to do a commercial for us to talk about supporting equal rights. But hopefully I'm the one that gets to make that ask. But it's pretty broad. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question on the municipalities.
Can you stand up?
Oh, I'm
So
sorry.
sorry.
Renee Dargento. Hi. I have a question about municipalities. Are they actually signing a resolution, the towns themselves? on this?
So her question, just so for the camera, is are municipalities signing resolutions in support? How are they formally endorsing?
Yeah.
There's not one answer to that. Yes, some are signing resolutions supporting this. Others, like the public officials, have taken a vote to support it. We have two arms. We have an education arm, and we also have a political campaign arm. And in many cases, they've supported the education arm to sort of stay away from the electoral politics. But there are 12 municipalities in Massachusetts that have broad protections for the transgender community before the state even did anything. So there are already communities on the books that have said this is important. Even if the state falls asleep at the wheel, we're going to do the right thing.
So is there language that your educational arm has if somebody wanted to propose a resolution
Yes.
for a town?
So the question is, do we have sort of sample language where towns might be able to look at, to consider in terms of endorsing that? And yes, and feel free to follow up with me after if that's something of interest. Good question. And law enforcement officials. I'll get to you in 1 second. Quite often the opposition likes to couch the reason why we don't want to extend equal rights to the transgender community is because it's a public safety hazard. That might sound ridiculous on the face of it. Wait till you see the commercial that I'm going to play later, and then you're going to understand. We've got the law enforcement community lined up supporting this. They understand that discrimination leads to violence. They understand that the transgender community is disproportionately more likely to be a victim of a crime than the perpetrator of a crime. Do you mind standing up again?
Sure.
Give me some points, cameraman. Like, I'm remembering all the stuff.
You might not be able to get Tom Brady because he's a Trump supporter, but you might be able to get his boss, Mr. and Mrs. Kraft, the owner of the Patriots, would probably support you.
Yeah, so the comment was that the owner of the Patriots, Mr. Kraft, may support this, and they have. They are on endorsing, and I do believe they've actually written a check. All the sports teams have written. And you know, it's this is an issue that cuts across ideological lines. It's easy for us to look at the history of some of these issues and assume it's a left or right thing. But for someone like Mr. Kraft, and he looks at what happened in North Carolina, the last thing he wants, I would think, is for a giant artist to say, you know what, I'm not playing at Gillette Stadium. No offense, Mr. Kraft, but Massachusetts, my fans don't want anything to do with that because of this vote. There's a lot to be lost there. And not for nothing, I think franchises, regardless of whether the owners are typically physically conservative or not, they want to be on the right side of history. And I think it's pretty clear when it comes to this issue, especially in the Me Too chapter that we're living, and hopefully it's not just a chapter, that they're highly cognizant of how being on the right side of harassment issues and civil rights issues and equal rights issues ties into the perception of their brand. And again, I think that's the reason why corporations are leading this fight in many ways, which is not traditional when it comes to civil rights and equal rights battles. All right, so think it can't happen. This is where I'm going to show you the opposition's ad. I'm going to try to get as close as I can to the... Is this set up for sound for the speakers to come out here? Okay. I'll give a little bit of background. So the opposition's message is essentially they want the public to think that by extending equal rights to the transgender community, that this will enable folks like myself to essentially just cross-dress, go into the bathroom for the purpose of sexually assaulting someone. Mind-bogglingly stupid. 200 municipalities in the country have had equal protection laws on the books for years. Many states already do. There's been no uptick in these type of things. And that's aside from the fact that it's illegal to go into a bathroom for the purpose of assaulting someone. Right? It just flies in the face. But fear works. It's easier to vote against something than it is for something.
The Measure 1 bathroom bill. What does it mean to you? Any man at any time could enter a women's bathroom simply by claiming to be a woman that day. No one is exempt. Even registered sex offenders could follow women or young girls into the bathroom, and if a business tried to stop them, they'd be fined. Protect women's privacy. Prevent danger. Vote no on the Measure 1 bathroom bill. It goes too far.
It's intellectually dishonest. It's effective. In Houston, this ad is from Houston. Let's just say Houston polling showed about 65% or so of the public supporting a local ordinance that was very similar, that would have given equal rights protections to public amenities. This ad aired. Their MO of the opposition is to do absolutely nothing, throw ads up at the last second, Molotov cocktail, and watch chaos ensue. They ended up winning close to 2-1. That's a radical swing in a short period of time. They couch it as a bathroom bill. They failed to mention that this meant that restaurants could refuse to serve someone who was transgender, that you could get tossed out of a restaurant, that you could be denied employment because you were transgender. All right, so we did an online survey. The reason we did it online instead of over the phone was we actually wanted to show the messaging to the opposition. We wanted them to see the video, right? We wanted to know whether this message resonated in Houston. There was some evidence that it resonated in other parts of the country. We didn't want to go on the assumption because Massachusetts has this rich history of leading with marriage equality and other issues and not letting the national landscape influence the outcome of how they think of things. We didn't want to take that for granted. So we tested this not too long ago either, in September. Again, likely November 2018 voters, a fine sample size, about 800. And it was a series of questions, right? It wasn't just, see this video, what do you think? But testing messengers and messages to see what resonates. And I will get specific with you, more specific than I get with most groups. We start with very strong support here, right off the bat. When you give people the ballot language, you explain, even without explaining to them what it is, just have them hear the ballot language, 67% off the bat are for it. That sounds eerily familiar to Houston 65% though, doesn't it? The base level of support in Massachusetts is stronger. In other words, the people that are just ardently for this as opposed to passively for it is a little bit stronger. That's good. But the takeaway here is the opposition ad was very convincing. Very convincing and makes us very competitive. If we did nothing from now to the election and they aired their ads, I think we lose. A combination of the fear of the ad and ballot confusion and other dynamics that I'll get into a little bit later in terms of turnout and what else is going on in the landscape. It's not a presidential election year where, you know, millions of folks are going to be voting. It's probably going to be closer to 2.2 million as opposed to the normal, what is it, 70% in presidential? It's pretty high in presidential years. So just real quickly, to the point of Alexandra, this doesn't necessarily fall on a left-right issue, but when they hear the opposition's, ads, sometimes it does fall to this. And there are some, if there's one commonality as to who's most vulnerable to the opposition's message, there's some similarities to the last presidential election. It's folks with only a high school degree. It's folks who don't know someone who that are part of the LGBTQ community. Independents older than 55. Not a shocker here. So some of that is traditional, but it definitely cuts across party lines. But, a lot of the support does come from the normal suspects, if you will. But this is a state, right, that voted for Baker. So you could say, Democratic state, blue state. What do we have worried about? No. People are discerning. They don't necessarily think with their ideological hat all the time. So signs of caution, quite frankly, is the fact that the opposition, we know their playbook. They don't need a whole lot of resources. They just need money at the last second for ads, which in Massachusetts is expensive. And panic ensues. So that is a sign of caution. So what are we going to do about it? I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're going to do about it, but also the general messages that jump out as being the most effective for us. The top messages for us come around safety enforcement and endorsement. Having public safety officers saying, no, it's in the public interest to have these protections. It does two things. It legitimizes the issue, but it does also undermine the opposition's message that this is a public safety hazard. But they're going to have their law enforcement official, and we're going to have our law enforcement official, and I don't know what Is it going to be a wash? We're not sure. So that's a challenge. The other top tier message, and I'll admit to being pleasantly surprised and thankful for this, but transgender kids. Transgender kids are very, very good messengers with this in terms of talking about the importance of equal rights. This law does not apply to public schools. Public schools already have the protections under federal law, but nonetheless, children, it's really hard to demonize children. I suppose that's why the opposition has such a hard time confronting messages with transgender kids. And quite frankly, just the general message of love over fear. Sounds corny, but it resonates. Our campaign, we have a duty to educate. We want the public to understand more what it means to be transgender, why it's important to extend equal rights protections. But in the end, you don't necessarily have to fully understand what it means to be transgender. People understand that it's wrong to single people out because they're different and withhold rights from them. And in this case, this isn't even withholding rights. Think about this. We're actively repealing a right. This is an existing right. This is a fact that shouldn't be lost on people. We're not talking about being on the cutting edge of something and extending a new right because we're just in advanced society. No, we're talking about taking a civil right away through a ballot. That message we haven't tested, I assure you we will, because I believe the public cares about whether they're taking away a right or not. I think they're more reluctant to take away a right than they maybe are to grant someone else the right if they're in the middle. Secondary messages. Massachusetts pride. There is a history with Massachusetts of looking at the rest of the nation and being like, you know what, you go in that direction, we're going to go in this direction because it's the right thing to do. And they don't like to be told that what other states have done, what that Houston failed, or in fact in Anchorage, Alaska right now, there's going to be a vote in a couple weeks on this issue. If it goes well or it goes poorly there, Massachusetts tends not to care because we're their own state. The secondary message at work is the fact that the law works. It's not something we're debating about whether it will work or not. It's already been on the books. The sky didn't fall. There's been no uptick in public safety concerns. And in fact, even before the state passed the law, it was enacted all over the country in a bunch of different municipalities and states. And also the secondary message that talks to harassment. Just like, let's be real. We're talking about bullying now a lot in our society. You take this law off the books, it will embolden those who have a natural inclination or unnatural inclination towards bigotry and harassment. It's really going to be awful, and it's going to be awful for kids too. And making the argument that it's time to move on. Forgive me for being blunt here and insensitive, but it works with my family members sometimes. You don't have to understand this. You don't have to be comfortable with it. Pick your knuckles off the ground and do the right thing. It's time to move on. The world is changing. Sorry to be a little animated, but when I talk about my family, I often do. And that it's really not about safety. Just being direct about the opposition's argument that this isn't about safety. And if I may say, to the extent that their message had some sort of element of, oof, this does feel about safety. When was the last time these organizations that are funding these commercials made a donation to a domestic violence prevention organization? We're waiting. Yeah, it's not about safety. It's about repealing a right. If they prevail here, they'll roll it out in other states. In fact, they will anyway, but they'll do so more aggressively. If they're successful with striking out rights for the transgender community, they're not going to stop there. They're going to move on. So the messengers. Who are trusted messengers? Specifically, in generalities. I mentioned the kids, teachers of transgender children, teachers in general, the Massachusetts Chiefs of Police Association. Elizabeth Warren came out on there as being a trusted messenger too. We trusted all sorts of messengers. And sexual assault and domestic violence organizations were very credible and trusted messengers when we did this poll. Again, we tested what we thought our opposition's best messengers were in addition to ours. So we're able to compare apples to apples. So recommendations in terms of how do we move forward? Well, our challenge is we have to figure out a way to assuage the safety concerns at the same time as increase empathy and knowledge about transgender individuals. That means we're going to have to utilize the Coalition Against Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence. We're going to have to use law enforcement. And we're going to have to elevate parents and teachers. We're going to have to do that. Now, back to the concern about assuaging safety concerns. That requires us to be active earlier rather than later, and I'll address that a little bit earlier. Other populations that, we're not concerned about, but we have to make a concerted effort to do outreach with are people of color, for a variety of reasons. They were disproportionately, communities of color are disproportionately susceptible to this fear argument. They're also, in some of those communities, less likely to vote in an off-year election. It's typically thought of as being the base on these civil rights issues, not necessarily. And women particularly are important demographic. I think some of that comes into the fact that the opposition's messaging is so about public safety, and this will allow people to prey on women, that it makes women that are polled on this issue and see the ads more susceptible to questioning it. And non-college Democrats. Also, voters outside Boston, the Boston media market, tends to get, a little more challenging the further out. So the plan to win. I'll skip right to the next slide. For lack of a better word, inoculation. Telling the public what they're going to see before they see it, so that when they see it, they're less persuaded by it. If I told you all, when I'm done giving this rap, you're going to go outside and there's going to be a car on fire, you'd be like, what? Are you kidding? But you go outside and see that car on fire, you'd be like, good, the car's on fire. He said it's going to be on fire. You're going to be less shocked. Your pulse, then no one worry about your vehicle. I don't have someone up there to prove a point. Please. No reasons to pull the fire alarm. But your pulse won't go up as much. It won't. Because I told you what you're going to see before you see it. We're literally going door to door right now with tablets showing vulnerable populations this video. We're leading with our chin, if you will, for a variety of reasons. Again, to tell people what they're going to see before they see it, but also to test a variety of messages about how to walk them back and bring them back onto the ledge. And so we're able to test different messages with different populations to figure out what works or not. It's very time consuming. It's very expensive. These aren't quick door knocks. They're more like one-on-ones, to be honest with you. But this is how we beat them.
So it's like you're giving them spoilers to make them less afraid and almost cancel out what these ads are trying to do.
So the comment there, sorry, I'm repeating it just for the sake of the camera, is that we're spoiling the opposition's message so it's less effective. Absolutely. Yep.
Throw some of our own Molotov cocktails right at the end to do that?
You know, that's my MO. And it's not just because I had two older brothers that beat the living snot out of me. I want to fight back. But this is a data-driven campaign. And to be honest with you, and that fear, that love over fear message is really what resonates with folks. And when you get really aggressive, you fall into those partisan camps. You really do. And we're looking to avoid that. That being said, we're not going to be shy about calling out the baloney when it happens. We're not going to fight back. But we're not going to use intellectually dishonest or fear-mongering arguments to do it. Question? Do you mind standing up just for the camera?
You mentioned on this door knocking test.
Yeah.
How much time are they spending with the party they're interviewing and showing us?
Yeah. So a full conversation could normally last 10 minutes.
And about how many people are they reaching?
And so the question for the camera again was, how long are the conversation? How many people are they reaching? We plan to reach, well, let's just say over 6 figures. And so it's a combination of paid employees and very well-trained volunteers. But a conversation could last anywhere between 3, 10, 11 minutes. We're constantly testing and refining Yeah, but again, we're targeting a population that we believe are persuadable, right? Their instincts might, the numbers show that they're inclined to be on our side, but they're susceptible to the opposition's message. So that's why we're targeting them. Like, we're skipping over voters' homes. We're very much micro-targeting so that we can test these messages. It's not about galvanizing our base per se. It's about getting that thin layer of persuadables and making sure that they understand what's going to happen before it happens. Am I going all right in terms of space and time? Okay. So how do we do this? Well, we got to leverage our coalition. We have a very broad coalition. One of the things that excited me most before I came on board was just looking at the coalition list. All my life I've been working on social justice issues. And to see all those corporate logos on it, I did a double take. I thought I'd clicked on the wrong page. It's very heartening to see support from entities that normally you wouldn't assume would be helping lead the fight. And so we got to leverage our coalition and the diversity of our coalition, but we also have to have broad distribution of the message. I just talked about micro-targeting, that thin layer of folks that we're worried about. The fact of the matter is we got to get on the airwaves too. We got to have a broadcast message that gets to these homes and saturates the electorate. Another consideration, quite frankly, is turnout. There's a lot of variables here. The gubernatorial race is up for debate as to how much of a driver of turnout that will be. Elizabeth Warren's race, right? There's some debate there about how competitive it will be, right? We have a lot of activity in the third. We also have other ballot initiative questions that are potentially on the ballot. That's really interesting. The one shining subject I would say with some of the other ballot questions is I think it disproportionately galvanizes millennials, like the living wage things and something. I think there's a real potential for that to be helpful. Plus, our sense is that if they do make the ballot, they'll also be yes votes. So there might be just consistency in message there. We're not really sure. It's beyond our control, quite frankly. But turnout is a factor. If people stay home, this could be a problem. Question, do you mind standing up again? Yeah.
Sure. The Fair Share Amendment is on the ballot. Do you think those voters will likely vote yes for this?
It's tough to say. But the question was, if the Fair Share Amendment gets on the ballot, are those voters likely to vote for this? Good chance. Good chance. I mean, the question is, will the Fair Share Amendment get people to vote that wouldn't have voted otherwise?
Yeah.
Like we could say, there's commonality, but really, is it increasing turnout in some way? Not sure. Haven't tested it. My gut says yes. My gut says yes. Economic issues. Just look at Donald Trump. Say what you want about him. He got Bill Clinton's message. It's the economy, stupid. And so I think when it comes, he registered with the middle class. I think there's the potential for that to help. Yeah. But, we have no control over that. So just going on in terms of what do we have to do? We have to defend our initial strong position, which, people's predisposed positions are to do the right thing and not discriminate. But the opposition's message is effective. We also want to limit the drop-off. That persuadable universe that can be flipped, just limit that. We're going to lose some. In fact, we're going to lose some in the LGBT community. Fact. But we want to limit it. And we also want to expand the voter universe to the extent that we can. And quite frankly, have a strong, flexible strategy. We've learned a lot from our own polling. We've learned a lot from other states. But there's still some cases that we don't know what we don't know. And we have to be honest about that, and that's one of the reasons it's going to be an $8 to $10 million campaign. And a lot of that's going to be going into testing messaging. And doing the door-to-door stuff that we're doing now is obviously very expensive, but it's very early. We have to do that to inoculate. So this is where, want to take questions. This is the website. Forgive me for not having materials with me tonight. Please go to that website. We are doing a rebranding, hence not fresh materials, but there's plenty of information up there that you can use in your own sort of social networks or just to sort of familiarize yourself even more. So at this point, would love to take questions. When you take a question, I'm going to want to ask you to stand up for the cameraman, and I may repeat your question. I'm not trying to be obnoxious, but it's for the public. So you raised your hand.
Question. Is registering voters part of your strategy, so with new voters?
Yeah, yes, yes. The question was, will voter registration play a role in this? It does. Probably a lot in college campuses, to be honest. We also, Massachusetts has early voting, right? People get to vote, I believe, 2 weeks out now. The last similar election that this happened, I believe it was only one election cycle where this happened in Mass. 50% of those who voted before Election Day. Yikes. So GOTV feeds into that. My theory is too that might make it harder for the opposition. They're going to have to get more ads up earlier. So it's going to be more expensive for both sides to reach those voters. And sort of the last minute Molotov cocktail might be less effective if, say, a third of the voters have already voted. But it's something we're going to organize around. Any other questions, comments? Right, then, okay.
Out of curiosity, you talked about discrimination against transgender people. How do I know anybody's transgender? You walk by me, that's a nice-looking young lady. How do you know?
How do you know if someone's being discriminated? The question.
How do you know they're transgender?
Sometimes the question was, how do you know they're transgender? I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that question, but sometimes you don't, and that's okay.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Some people are identifiably transgender, and some aren't. The fact of the matter is, can you imagine a scenario where a loan officer can say, nope, not going to do this, right? I mean, that's just, it's crazy, and it happens. It happens. And even if we believe it doesn't happen or it doesn't happen enough, there's still not a great argument to not expand equal rights protections to the transgender community. It just isn't there.
You mentioned the impact on the Black community. Did you reach out to Black Lives Matter?
The question was the impact to the African American community, and have we reached out to Black Lives Matter? I'm not certain if we've reached out to Black Lives Matter in particular. We have a coalition director. In all likelihood we have, but I just can't say for certain on the record that we have. But we've made a lot of inroads with organizations and leaders of color, and making a concerted effort to have staff come from some of the communities that we need to engage from. Yeah, it's a challenge.
Have you had support from the interfaith workers groups and people like that?
Absolutely. The question was, do we have support or contact with the interfaith community and workers? The answer is yes. And in fact, we're bringing on an interfaith director in about a week, who's African American, transgender woman who I believe is a minister, forget the denomination, but will not only hit the ground running, but will be breaking the sound barrier, and very excited to have them on board.
Today was the student walkout for the guns, the gun initiative. I don't really know how to put it, other than restriction on assault weapons and things like that. Were there organizers out with the youth groups today? I know there was events all over the state today. Sometimes teenagers can have more impact on their parents or older siblings than media groups. And also what we saw in the wake of Parkland, at least the NRA has absolutely no problem trying to discredit children or teenagers and say they're actors and dupes and stooges. So you had mentioned it.
Yeah, the question was whether we had folks out there during the student walkout. I don't know the answer to that. I don't necessarily know what the organizers are doing on a day-to-day basis. Our field director does that. I wouldn't be shocked. At the same time, I will admit that we're reluctant, we're very careful about how we want to blur issues. When we see an organizing opportunity, we're going to pounce on it. Where there's a population of folks congregating that we want to organize it, but we also don't want to undermine other efforts, and there may be other opportunities for us to engage the youth that are even more productive and allow us to stay on message as well. In terms of youth, as much as it shows that having a transgender child or young person as being a spokesperson is helpful, we got to be cognizant that once you out yourself as transgender, that sticks with you. And it's easy for us to say, just come on, kid, talking to the mic. One more take. That sticks with them. They got to deal with the ramifications of that, right? And we're doing this work to make lives better, not to exploit. That being said, we know that there are children out there that want to stand up for themselves and want to stand up for their friends, and whose parents are, not going to discourage that. And God bless them. In the back, we're going to ask you to stand. Thank you.
Sort of in the interest or in the vein of Massachusetts Pride, is the resistance to transgender rights something that's homegrown in our state, or are there other layers to this?
Boy, the question was, is the opposition to transgender equal rights homegrown, or is it something else? I'm not a scholar on this to that extent, but gender identity for most people is not a fluid thing. It's boy, girl, boy, girl. That's what we're taught at birth. And we're taught to associate body parts with gender identity, and very rigid. And it's being transgender, I think it's harder for me. It's harder to understand than maybe it is of being gay. So you're more susceptible to misinformation. I will say with my own kids' lives, and I have friends who have children, the families are incredibly conservative, very religious. And their kids, they have transgender kids in their own classroom that are open, and they have no problems using the correct pronouns. They, them. They're like, whatever. She's a she. That's fine. And the parents are like, what are you talking about? The kids get it. So I'm inclined to think the gender thing is just at a very early level drilled into our head that you're either or. But also, kids just get it. And so a lot of it is learned. Probably didn't answer your question adequately.
Well, I probably may not have been very clear about it, but this is a law. It's been on the books for 2 years. I don't know if it's appropriate for the governor at this point to stand up in defense of the bill that he signed.
Yeah.
But if it's been a law on the books and kind of flows with the general culture of our state, why is this happening now? What's driving this?
Okay. I'm sorry I misunderstood the question. The question is, what's driving this now, right? There's been support for it, and now there's an attempt to repeal it. We're talking about the fringe of the fringe, right? Like, I think we got to be careful to make sure that the fact that this made it to the ballot is not necessarily a reflection of where the electorate's at. It only took 28,000 signatures to get on the ballot, right? Of those 28,000 people, how many understood exactly what they were doing? I don't know. We haven't tested that. So I think we have to be careful not to make too much out of it. But I think we live in a time where people are emboldened. They feel threatened. They see, whenever there's advancements made with civil rights, there's sort of a temporary backlash, people pushing back. I think this is the last hurrah I think you can have the opposition, the people who are against the marriage equality. They had the Supreme Court ram that down their throats. And now they're just trying to chip away at the most vulnerable populations that they can to galvanize their own base. That's my take. Why they're picking Massachusetts? A, because it's easy to get on the ballot, and B, if they win here, it's a Hail Mary that was caught. And if they win here, they'll be able to get funding from all these other organizations to roll this out in other states. Sorry, I don't know who was first, but they'll go with you. Yep.
Relative to that, I'm wondering if there's outside money coming into this to fund this repeal, and if there is money coming in, who the organizations or who the people who are bringing money to the state?
The question was, who's bringing money in? Is any of it coming from out of state? Are you referring to our campaign to stop the repeal, or the opposition, where the money's coming from?
Where the opposition is coming
Okay, the opposition's money will almost entirely come from out of state, from sort of family institute type organizations. Yeah, it's not homegrown. Their last campaign filing, the opposition showed them, I forget off the top of my head, it was relatively small amount of money. I want to say $50,000 or so, a couple thousand were from local folks, the rest was from national groups. And we trust that at the last second, they're going to have no problems getting $2-3 million to get on radio and TV. Alexandra?
On your polling, you showed that teachers were among the most effective messenger to communicate why there should be a yes vote on this. Could you tease that out a little bit more in terms of the reasons why, but then also comment on the efficacy for people here? I mean, one of the things that you can draw from this is, I as a transgender person, not a good messenger for this. The polling indicates that. But as you're dealing with your networks, is there a usefulness in reaching out particularly to teachers that people know so that they can then in their own networks be ambassadors?
Yeah. The question was, teachers came out as being effective messengers. And maybe, why is that? My guess is, as much as being an educator is a demonized profession, really is, my goodness, there's still trust that the public has that teachers have the best interests of children at stake, especially if it doesn't affect their normal day-to-day classroom and it's not a paycheck thing or healthcare thing, that they have the best interests of the well-being of their kids. I think that's probably the main reason. And I don't know if we tested a male teacher. So how much of that was a trusted messenger simply because the educator was female and people just inherently trust females to maybe have the best interests of children at stake, and it being a vulnerable demographic within our own messaging, that could be a contributing factor. We need to retest some of this stuff. Yeah, we go back and it was a very long poll and we're like, why did we word it that way? Why didn't we word it this way? And we're going to be retesting it and then testing that and retesting it again.
Yeah. Follow up.
Follow
I
up.
just realized that as you're saying this might be a good way to serve as a proxy for trans kids, because of the point that once you're out, you can never go back. I know this very well. But then that's a way to talk about the experience of trans kids without actually putting a trans kid through that.
Very good comment. The comment was that we can use teachers to be the voice of trans kids and putting the kids in the position where they don't have to out themselves. But yes, great idea. We did not test that. In the back, someone?
I'm wondering also, because I know realtors, being a realtor is another area that is demonized. And I'm wondering if, with the Federal Fair Housing Act, the Code of Ethics requires that realtors do not discriminate against sexual orientation along with 5 or 6 other areas. And I'm wondering if any outreach to the National Association of Realtors and particularly in Boston, the Greater Boston Board of Realtors and Northeastern Board of Realtors, they might be able to help get this message out as well.
Yeah, I believe the answer to that is yes. That we have reached out to them, or the other way around. I can't say at this time off the top of my head whether they're a coalition partner. We do have that out online. Forgive me for not knowing off the top of my head, but we do have some individual realtors that have sort of their own smaller businesses that have endorsed the campaign. But yes, that's a good point. In the back?
I didn't know if you were in contact with gay straight alliances in the different school systems, because many schools have such programs, and it just seems like they might be a natural group to communicate with.
The question was whether we've reached out to the Main Street alliances, as it's a... Gay Street Alliance, you said? I thought you said Main Street.
No, gay straight alliances.
Yeah.
A lot of schools have these organizations for LGBTQ kids, so where they can feel kind of comfortable with
Yes.
one another, and also allies are also involved. So it's a mixture of kids that are in the LGBT community and also kids that are identified as trans.
There are a variety of groups that are LGBTQ, that are youth-oriented, that we have reached out to. I can't say specifically which ones we have and haven't. Our organizing team and our coalitions director are on top of that and on a daily basis. Yeah. A good amount of our volunteers, I will say anecdotally, tend to be youth. So whatever they're doing is working in terms of reaching the youth. How that conduit exactly is happening community by community is sometimes unclear to me, but they're filling up the phone banks and they're knocking on the doors, so keep up the good work. Right in front?
Just a question on my concern with how the wording is of the actual question and getting out the word to everybody that you should vote yes.
Yeah.
Are you doing ads or radio spots or things like that that will educate
Yes.
the public? I know usually the women voters have a booklet that they give out.
Yeah.
So is that going to be in there and make sure people understand?
The question was, will people know, are we going to be doing advertising that lets people know the language, which way to vote? The answer is absolutely yes. That's where most of our resources will be spent. We're still going about the branding. We want to know the final language before we sort of really hash everything out, but absolutely, by foot, by phone, by mail, by TV, by radio, we'll be broadcasting this message. But we have more testing to do to know how best to do that. We're trying to be data driven. We don't want to make assumptions. We've got people who've been working on these issues for well over a decade, being surprised what's coming back in some of these surveys. And sometimes it's because the way we asked it, and sometimes it's because the conventional wisdom of what we thought people would think or react to is wrong. The world is changing. And it's also not happening in a vacuum. The opposition is shifting the narrative in some areas too. I'm sorry, in the back. Sorry, I was ignoring you. Do you mind standing up? Thanks.
So I'm assuming your inoculation efforts targeting where you have the biggest populations, maybe in the cities and so forth. So what about small towns like Pepperell? I mean, I think it's great that you came out here, but what can we do in a town like Pepperell to support this?
So the question was, Phil, you said that rural communities are a little more of a challenge, but it's less dense. How are you reaching them? What can we do here? We are going to be door knocking and phone calling here. We are already. Don't know if we've door knocked Pepperell, but like in terms of like phone calls, we are definitely doing that. We will be looking to do events in communities like this that garner some earned media, in other words, print press, doing things like this so that the community just knows that it's on the ballot. That's half the battle right now. People don't know there's something on the ballot to repeal an existing state law. But specifically, maybe it's hosting a house party where some of your neighbors, if you're a member of an organization or your employer is potentially interested in endorsing, that's something that can be helpful. And little things like letters to the editor. I mean, it's not so little. If nothing else, it alerts the public that this is going to be on the ballot, and they need to be aware of it. And of course, financially, to the extent that you have a capacity to donate, we would put the resources to good use.
Can I just follow up?
Yes, follow up.
With
Yeah.
another comment. I think you need to be careful about data-driven. I'm not a statistician or anything, but the demographics that you're looking at. One of them up there, women over 55, non-college educated, independent voter. Here I am.
Yeah.
Also proud mom, transgender adult.
Yeah.
So I think you just need to be careful also with teachers. You're going to have teachers out there who are also very biased against having trans kids in their room, in their classroom. So I think you just need to be careful about putting people on buckets, because that's what we've done with the transgender people and the LGBT people in general.
You're right. The question was, if I can boil it down, it's really easy to stereotype and say this type of folks aren't going to support you, these type of people will. That is true. And when sometimes when you have a data-driven, you can imply that you're coming to certain conclusions that sort of write off entire populations. Yeah, I'm sorry if I gave that impression. But the data does show us, though, that there are certain populations that are more vulnerable. It's not that we can't get them and they're not supportive of it, but they're more susceptible to the opposition's messaging. Like I said, right, people assume that this is an inherently sometimes democratic issue. No. If Governor Baker hadn't signed this, good chance that there wouldn't have been the cover for others to do it. We lose let's try to think of this as a partisan issue, right? You would think of the Democratic base, okay, so you've got African Americans, you've got the LGBT community. We lose a good percentage of them. So yeah, it's really important to not make assumptions and say groups of people are with us or against us. That being said, we've got to be strategic, because this public safety argument that the opposition uses is really effective at really playing into the good instincts of many women, which is they want to protect themselves, they want to protect their female friends, they want to protect their kids. And that sort of uses misinformation to tap into those really positive instincts. And so we're just got to be hyper aware of that. Yeah.
You mentioned you have the support of the Police Chiefs Association. What about, and I know you get labor support in a number of these areas, but what about police unions? Because that's where things tend to get to a different level. And I think would be I think they need to be included in that group, because I wouldn't necessarily count them in that group.
Yeah. The comment or the question was, you've got the Police Chiefs Association, other law enforcement entities. What about the police unions? Off the top of my head, I don't know of the 11 unions that we have. I believe that was the number up there. Maybe it was 17, if any of them are police unions. It's not a deliberate omission. It's just a matter of, over the course of the last few months, we've only reached out to so many entities, but it's certainly not an entity we would want to ignore.
You just made me actually a little angry. You said, how many unions? Massachusetts has a lot of unions.
Yeah.
And it's like, why aren't they all supporting this?
Well, the question was, how come? Yeah. Well, thank God, because I was getting nervous.
There are democratic organizations that are established to protect employees' rights and workers' rights.
Yeah.
And I was a president of Central Labor Council in northern New Mexico. This is a natural for organized labor, whether they're conservative or not. This is what the organizations stand for, and they should be held. Their feet should be held to the fire to support this.
Yeah, I agree. I will also say not having more unions is not, we haven't had a single union tell us no. So it's more of a reflection of us not having asked yet. And so I own that, we own that. If we're guilty of anything as a campaign, it's trying to do our best to get as many of the unusual suspects as we can early on, to give credibility to the campaign.
I'll volunteer to help.
With the unions? Okay, yeah, great. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Like, folks like Marty Walsh have talked to us about like sort of working with some of the labor unions. Like, people volunteered. It's just a matter of us trying to work the best we can to get as many people as we can. We have one coalitions director, and we have 750 coalition partners. I'm shocked that we have that many that quick. We're going to break 1,000, I would say, in the next 60 days.
I kind of have an anecdotal theory about that, about unions maybe not being as involved. The Raise Up campaign, which has 3 questions that they're trying to, well, one of them is on the ballot, but the other 2 we're going to get on the ballot if the legislature does nothing. That would be paid family medical leave, $15 minimum wage, and the fair share amendment. And the unions are very caught up with these campaigns. And I've been working on single payer as a campaign, and they're like, talk to us after November.
Yeah,
So.
I do, so the question, I don't know if the camera heard that, was unions have their own issues on the ballot. I will say that SEIU contributed $100,000 to the campaign right out of the gate as an early investor. And this is an entity that, there's 3 or 4 labor things that they're trying to get on the ballot or working towards. And I was flabbergasted that they would give us resources, given the fact that they've got so many things on the ballot that have an immediate effect over their members. And so that, yeah, I want to call them out and give them credit.
And just a comment on like police unions, oftentimes the top echelon of the law enforcement, like the chiefs, and they're one group, but the union of like the majority of cops and that kind of thing, they're the ones on the street. They're the ones who are like setting a tone of behavior and tolerance and acceptance. And if there's time to kind of target a lot of larger groups of unions where people can really dictate behavior or have more of a stake in being responsible when they're working amongst the people. It really is important to kind of appeal to those people.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes they're just like hookers too. They just got a gun, a badge. You know, some of them are kind of like they'll go either way if they're not held to a higher standard of behavior. And, you know,
Yeah.
and it's kind of important to not just go to the tops of groups and, the you know, of politicians or law enforcement. Or, you know, it's good to kind of hit a lot of the majority of, you know, regular schmo
Yeah.
security.
So the comment was, again for the camera, forgive me for cutting you off, was don't just go for the head when it comes to law enforcement. What about the rank and file officers? Because they set, yeah, and that's true. And I think but the best way to get our foot in the door sometimes is to have sort of the credibility that the leaders can provide. And I will say this, there is a history with the LGBT community, particularly with the trans community, of not being completely comfortable with some of the culture of police officers. And folks have come a long way. But they're a trusted messenger. But at the same time, I've spoke to trans people that are like, listen, I've been knocked around twice in my life. Once was by a bigot, and the other was by a law enforcement officer.
Well, I understand.
And right, like, and so there's those elements there too. But we have a duty to educate too, and sometimes changing the culture means familiarizing folks and not demonizing them. And it's very similar to.
That's where I was coming from.
Yeah.
I just meant on a level of educating the public, and part of the public is law enforcement. I'm just saying, not criticizing and saying, you know, you're wrong. You know, you shouldn't be beating up people, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just education, because then that helps people think twice about their behavior. You know,
Yeah.
twice before they actually express. And I'm not. You've got a lot to do tonight. You're winding down and all that good stuff. I'm just saying.
I haven't set a car on fire yet. I'm just.
Yeah, and I see the glitter ball. I mean, I was waiting for a drink and a dance. I'm just saying, it's hopefully times will bring about. Part of the hate comes from ignorance to the diversity of the world.
So speaking to the diversity thing and the rank and file, there are a lot of larger police departments, unbeknownst to me till recently, that have LGBT groups, like subcommittees. And we've been meeting with them and reaching out to them, and quite often they've been providing us, hey, talk to our chief. We spoke to our chief, he's good, come talk to him. Or we know the sheriff, here's your cell phone number. Like, so some of it has been trickling up organically, and it's not us just looking for the heads. And that was interesting. It's been nice to see that. I have time for one more, I'm told. Anybody? Make it a good one.
Are you doing any to work with the veterans organizations? Because, you know, we're at the VFW tonight, with American Legion, there's all sorts of veterans organizations. Are you doing anything to enlist their support?
The question was, are we doing anything with the veterans organization? And I hate to end on a downer note, but to my knowledge, no, we're not. And that's a great, I will make a mental note of that. We very well could be, and I just don't know.
You've got some amazing spokespeople in the military, and they're members of the trans community.
Yeah.
2 SEALs, I mean, etc. I mean, just, yeah, find them.
And, you know, it's, yes, that's a very good point, and very great way to, I think, end the night in terms of, especially given the venue that we're at. So I'm happy to answer questions after, or take comments, or even suggestions about, you know, how to improve this, or how to be more clear, or just general impressions of the campaign. So thank you very much.